Psychotechnologies Live.
Welcome to another special episode of Psychotechnologies Live. We have with us, I believe, our first recurring guest, Layman Pascal. Layman Pascal is a spiritual practitioner, theorist, inter-community facilitator, aka the metamodern shaman. He's got a new course on parallax and about masculinity and femininity and how technology affects that. We'll hopefully get to that later. But first, something very special that all three of us have in common is that we are all working on the Emerge unconference, I guess it's called. And Layman, we want to know, you've just crafted a message for Europe. We want to know, what is that message? Where does it come from? Like, what are you thinking? How are you thinking about this? Let's start to get into this. Like, how do we craft a metamodern conference message?
All right, so this is in a way a first pass at thinking about the languaging, things that might be on the website and stuff like that in the future. This is my draft, so it's even probably full of weird grammar mistakes and stuff. But Ivo Mensch asked me if I would do a write-up about Toronto to go into the European Emerge newsletter. This is what I wrote. We're delighted to announce the Emerge Toronto 2023 event is underway. Hosted by the Integral Leadership Review Network in tandem with Constructing Consciousness, this transformative unconference will occur September 17th and 19th at Evergreen Brickworks, a local experiment in the cosmopolitan regenerative greening of a defunct industrial site set amongst the forested trails of downtown Toronto, Canada. This second North American Emerge event will bring together several hundred specially chosen participants around the theme of grounding the field. We ground into depth, place, death, shadow, embodiment, diversity, indigeneity, affective intelligence, and other qualities that are frequently underemphasized by the usual events in the transformational, developmental, and metamodern culture. Dozens of mutually attuned facilitators and Gnostic intermediaries will hold space for a healthy mixture of established members of existing liminal communities, local indigenous teams, and dedicated responders to the regenerative elemental needs of the politically besieged Toronto watershed, as well as aligned artists, activists, networkers, and seers. This co-learning, deep listening, and multimodal event will be both luxurious and earthy, futuristic and ancient. We hope it will set the standard for the future distributed planetary and locally themed expansion of the Emerge project. FOMO guaranteed.
I like that. FOMO guaranteed. I heard the phrase setting the ground. And that just sounds like the coolest psychotechnology ever. Do you have a plan on how to actually do that, or is it like throw them all in together and tell them set the ground and let them like work it out for you?
Yeah, how do we ground the ground
I have a hope and a feeling, but this is so it's not on me. I'm just one participant in this now, so all I can do is mention that stuff and hope for it. I think the people who are coming together are really concerned about that range of qualities that seem to get left out. I think they're really good at being embodied. I think the facilitators are going to do a lot of work together to just be good containers and solid, full human beings to try to hold this space. And I think just being in as direct a contact with nature as possible. You know, one of the things, we might have mentioned this last time, talking about elementals and stuff, but I mean, just take your shoes off and stand on the earth. Right? Just to have a bunch of people do that already goes a long way to very simple, basic grounding.
I'm excited to ask the annoying question of like, what do you think is happening when people do that? Like, what is changing for them when they just take their shoes off? I guess I'm asking for like the scientific angle. I'm like, just tell a bunch of people to take off their shoes and then something will happen. Like, I believe something happens, but I also don't have a very good explanation.
Well, there's a couple of angles you could look at it from if you were just thinking scientifically. Like, one is obviously there's some kind of electrical phenomenon going on between the earth and the human body. And you're going to remove something that's interfering with that conductivity a little bit. A lot of it's going to be psychological. You're just moving out of your normal context and you're reasserting your connection to a natural context, which is closer to the one that our species evolved into. So we've got deep evolutionary, neurogenetic, archaic things that go along with that. And then, of course, any foot reflexologist will tell you there's all these tender little bits that get sensitized on the bottom of your feet when you stand on the ground, especially when it's like rough and flexible and irregular, things like that. So those are three very obvious ones. But I think more than anything, it's a symbolic gesture, especially when a bunch of people do it. It says that we're going to stand for that part of ourselves that's more in contact with our ecology and our body and our world.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's a lot. I like the tactile thing where it's like your feet are like meant to be touching ground all the time. And I think like with our hands, we're always touching things, which is like natural for us. But then to remove our shoes onto like actual like dirt and grass and stuff. And then
There's
that
an element
symbolic.
of fear, with your feet too. Like I grew up really rural, so I really like having my shoes off, but I don't trust it in the city. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's a bunch of stuff to step on that I don't want to step on. So when you're in a space where you can take your shoes off and put your bare feet on the earth, it also says we feel safe here. There, right? We're not afraid of what we might step on.
Oh, that's interesting. And then there's something I think powerful about getting all the people together to do this like weird thing, like this weird hippie thing. But it's like almost this it's like displaying your commitment kind of to it, that like you're willing to do something off the beaten path in order to because you want to take care of like the earth and the biosphere.
It's also an at least imaginal conversation participant. So John Vervaeke is doing this After Socrates series, and he had this great quote that he read a few episodes ago from the Phaedrus, where Socrates describes himself as like an amateur seer. And he says it's as if he hears a voice coming from the place. There's all this discussion about the inner daemon of Socrates, but it's often overlooked that he says it's as if it's coming from the place, right? And a lot of the indigenous communities and a lot of our ancestors would have regarded the imaginal place that they're in as one of the interlocutors in the wisdom conversation, right? That we are actually being informationally permeated by all the things we smell and by the electricity of the organisms around us and by the air and by the weather and by the qualities of the minerals in the earth and things like that. Very easy to ignore that. So when we stand on the earth or we make some kind of gesture to be more in contact with it, I think we have the opportunity to tune our awareness a little bit toward the fact that we are in a kind of dialogue, and that our imagination can assist us in being a more conscious participant in that dialogue, because there's a lot of complexity and a lot of knowledge in places if we're available to it.
So I want to weave this
Being
into.
in a relationship.
I've heard a lot of talk of the field when we go to the emerge conversation. Like people are trying to plan emerge around a field plan, like that the place should, I don't know, feel different or feel somehow remarkable before people even turn up to the event. There's some sort of field planning team. Is this what we're talking about in terms of the place? Is this the same thing?
I don't think you can establish a good field as a totally independent human social event, right? Now, that's a lot of what it is a sense of complex resonance between human beings, sort of imaginally reified as if it were a form of physics to describe the phenomenology. But when you just do that as a human social event, there's all of this ecological background that you miss. And I think that we're sort of built to do it the way our ancestors would have done it, which is to really do that anchored in place and to find places and to find aspects of those places that sort of stimulate that in ourselves, right? There's a lot of hokey bullshit about power spots, but you can definitely go to sites in the natural environment that make you feel high. And that's worth paying attention to. There's information in that.
Yeah, this is really cool. I feel like even just like as an unconscious, like the things that are affecting us, like our environment affects us, and like having the environment that affects us be the environment that we're caring for it's almost like you're giving a voice to the land itself, which I think does tend to get lost a lot in these kind of discussions or in this kind of movement. And then it starts to spiral outwards. But if we're like keeping the ground as part of us, it's almost like it becomes like the altar at which we're like, it becomes like, yeah, like the altar or the church that we're worshiping at is like the earth or something.
Yeah, for me, there's a collection of qualities and insights and skills that we can archetypally associate with the figure of the shaman. I think that's important to bring into any tradition or even any non-tradition, like secular and traditional environments of all kinds have definitely got to be more aligned with things like body, things like ecology, things like access to altered states. There's like this range of stuff where nature is one of those critical pieces that any wisdom tradition should be closely aligned with, because at this point, as a species, we can't really afford to have a Zen that's not ecological, or have an esoteric Christianity that's not ecological, or have a Sufism that's not ecological, right? There are ways to do that that are more and less aligned with nature, and we've really got to lean them into that pro-nature form, because the functional dissociation from the regenerative functions of the natural world, that's something we're all suffering from, and it's one of the accelerating precipice things we're trying to deal with here.
Right, like we are evolutionarily like designed to be in like a living environment, and this not living in our living environment is very recent as well.
Yeah, the time frame thing fascinates me. I bring it up all the time now, which is, the last 6,000 years when we've had writing and buildings, that's a tiny, tiny piece of what's been going on here. The vast majority of religion, spirituality, developmental exercise, culture, most of it happened without any of that stuff. Most of it happened deeply embedded in semi-wild environments, natural settings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like even like governmental structures and like societal structures very much emerged, like a lot of societies that emerged from what kind of environment they would live in. If you think of the Mongols, like the way they did warfare and government was very like horseback, and then we've got the Middle East with like the deserts, and then China with the flat plains and the rivers, and then you got mountainous people and island people, and their whole like just like the way they see the world and the way they interact with each other is literally based on the way they see the world.
Sure. Well, I grew up in a really lush, misty, rainy, temperate West Coast forest, and I gotta tell you, I'm pretty suspicious of desert people. I'm like, how are your brains even getting enough hydration? Like, it's a whole different way of living. I don't have in my body the wisdom for that environment, right? So it seems alien to me.
Yeah,
we've been having this like moist spell where there's just been moisture hanging around, and like or hot spell, like your skin covered in moisture, like, and I'm like, how do people exist in this like wetness, constant wetness? I don't trust that at all. To think they could be sane and rational when they're literally covered in water all the time. I'm like, ugh. It's a very different way to be.
Yeah,
there's such a different living embodiment of like, also like if you have like people from New York where they grew up in this city that's like super like it's like worlds and worlds inside New York, and just their attitude, the way they see things, the way they interact with things is just, it's even so different than even like the rural or like even other cities, like even like Toronto. I feel like, oh, like it's so large there and then New York is so large, and like then the difference in the rural.
I love the art of place. New York's a great one for that, because so many people like have made films or taken photos or made music that is like an homage to being in or from New York, right? There's these beautiful ways you can sample, like take a core sample of a city in a way by watching a movie about it or checking out all the bands that have come out of that place over the years and things like that. It's like you say, there's these, and it's really actually interesting because we're talking about deserts and wet areas. We're talking about cities. These are real things. Like there, you can see them. Whereas countries, those are kind of made up, right? And so it's an open question whether if we're going to be able to have a functional planetary civilization, are nation states, you know, the organs that fit together in that thing, or are nation states sort of getting in the way? One of the famous things people always point at is if you get a international convention of the mayors of cities all over the world, they team up and solve problems much better than representatives of the countries from around the world, because cities are real things. Countries are dubious things.
They exist, I think, on different levels of abstraction. But I do see, I definitely see what you're saying with the city, like the city level versus the country level. Like cities don't really worry about military so much, but countries are very focused on that. But then
there
all
are
the
problems you can only solve at very large levels of abstraction. But at the same time, the risk there is that you lose the feedback loops that connect you to an actual set of concerns, right? There's things you have to solve in real time in a city that the solvers of the problems get exposed to. Whereas there's whole sections of a country that could go down in flames and the decision makers might never experience any of that. So there's a break in that kind of Nassim Taleb anti-fragile feedback loop process.
We see this with natural disasters. It's very easy to have a natural disaster in a place that doesn't have the decision makers living there. I'm interested also, a while ago, I read a linguistics textbook, and it talked about the way that our language is shaped by the geography. Like even having a river separating two cities means that they'll drift linguistically away from each other. They'll develop their own little jargons, their own way of talking about things. And you can see this. You can like travel to the next suburb in your city and just notice a little bit of a different accent to that place, just a couple of blocks away. I'm so interested in how the landscape and the natural environment, like the shapes of the continents, define obviously how we discovered them as modern humans, or relatively modern, even a couple hundred years ago, and then how we interact with them. That's a huge thing.
I'm, as you know, as a Canadian, as somebody who's in a really wide country that has a few, you know, accent variations, but not too many. I'm obsessed by this density of dialectical variations you see in England, where, you know, people who live 30 miles down the road seem to have a completely different speech pattern. It's unbelievable. I would have to journey for days in my country before I found some people with a different speech pattern.
Yeah, I wonder if that's like the weather or the plants or the like even a pattern of allergies could create a different dialogue because people are pronouncing differently. Like it could be the plants, not just the geography, let alone the clouds. The you know, in San Francisco, there's something called the fog line. There's this one row of houses where the fog, when it comes in from the bay, it blows into a certain spot, and then after that it kind of stops or it like evaporates. But there's the fog line is well known as a geographic separation.
Sure.
That's the world we live in, a world with massive weather and geography patterns that define our culture that is built on top of it.
And then of course there's the reality of individuals who are always deviating from what's socially consistent around them, right? That the not just the shamans, but everybody's got some guy speaks differently, right? And then maybe his family would speak differently from the people all around him, or each. I don't know if it's true for you guys, but I seem to have a almost pre-linguistic layer of syntax in my brain. I hear it sometimes, or sometimes I just make noises and I go, oh, you know, every time I stub my toe, I make that noise. And it's not a word in any known language. It's like a word out of my inner language. There's this whole other stylistic ability, I think, that resides within us when we can make ourselves linguistically and socially deviant from the language and accent and social field in which we're embedded, because there's always a part of us that isn't what got trained up through our life experiences, but sort of lurks a little bit below that.
Yeah.
I'm interested in, this is a thread we found with Danielle as well, the something like growing individuality. Danielle talked about her work through building a giant psychology model and realizing that it was relative to the way she was perceiving the world on a very individual level. And this is like, you're discovering this as well, that like individually I can experience the world through a very, very much my own stub toe noises, like very much came out of my body. Like, oh, that's surprising. That was like really quite a lot more mine than other people's. Like, can you say more about this? I have a sense that individuals make the leaders, but also a strong collective is made out of strong individuals. This is something we say. Can you say more about this development of individual culture?
Yeah, one of the ways that I think about it is this kind of old-fashioned notion of there being something like essence and something like personality, like something like early on in your life, you mostly were exhibiting inherited characteristics. Right, you had sort of an imaginal built-in set of capacities, and you transitioned in childhood to being primarily in your waking state socialized personality. You learned a name, you learned the language, you learned the customs. So you were slowly transitioning from this infant, this child who could have been raised in any culture, to a person who was raised in a particular culture. But what happened to that previous personality? What happened to those peculiarities, those sensibilities that existed in that other state of consciousness in that young creature? It's still there somewhere, right? So there's this possibility to think, this is one way to think of these two functions as if they were different characters, and they have to get together to give rise to the hybrid phenomenon that is an individuality. So if you're stuck in one of them, like if you just never grew up, right, then you'd be a weird kind of human animal, but you wouldn't be able to communicate and develop yourself in the ways we would call an individual. Likewise, if you're just a purely social creature and you don't have any access to the kind of inherited peculiarity of your organism, then you seem like a kind of flat, empty, non-individual persona. So there are ways to think about combining those, right? If you have a certain kind of gibberish that comes out at you, and then you try to think with your learned social intelligence, oh, what does that mean? On the other hand, you could have like, oh, these are my keys, right? It's a piece of social information. But then I always get a weird, strange feeling about my keys that I've never really been able to put into language, and I can kind of weave those together somehow. Like a lot of art, and I think a lot of the rich, um, vibrant, complex spiritual characters throughout history have been these people who were able to kind of like generate a third personality out of the social and the biological personality that they were given, right? And we don't have to say social and biological, we could say right and left brain. There's lots of different ways to break that down, but just this notion that you kind of have two halves, and on their own they're nothing. The individuality is a phenomenon generated by their interaction and their deeper integration and interweaving.
This is like liminal shamanism, where you're finding the spaces in between that aren't expressed, and like bringing this out in this. It feels very shamanistic to me, like this base and social. And then like I guess like the metamodern or the emerge is what we want, where it's like we're not barbarians and we're not fake people, we're someone that's both or neither.
I think in some ways that's what the figure of the shaman has always stood for, being between, right? Being between the tribes, being between the genders, but also being between humanity and nature, and being between the overly civilized and the overly animalistic nature of human beings. We need a lot of people to be really good at walking that in between space, because so much of the rest of the system depends on them being able to do that well. And without training and support and luck, the odds are they burn out or crash or get compromised and never really get to fulfill that function in a way that's of use to anyone else.
All right. Or even like know that this is a thing that could be done.
Yeah.
I'm curious on the emerge thread. How do we? What does the container look like to enable people to be a bit more of a shaman, or be a bit more of a stronger individual, or be a bit more? What exactly are we building in the space to help them like show up? Is the more interesting side rather than the boring social self, the conformity self, or the like chaotic individual, untamed self. We want this complexity. How do we support it?
First of all, you have an open discussion about things like this. Second of all, there's a lot of vetting and selecting, right? I think more so for the pre-event that we've been discussing, because the main event has to be open to a very wide variety of people. But for the pre-events, we're looking for people that have more of that disposition already. There's different ways to have that. Some people are going to come in and be, oh, I'm a trained professional facilitator. Other people are going to come in and go, I'm just one of the people who feels these particular things a lot. So that kind of vetting, getting the right people together and allowing something to grow amongst them. I'm hoping that's what Tucker and Theon are going to provide as the container for that space. But my sense is nobody has the information to instruct anybody else in this, right? If I run a metamodern spirituality retreat or even the kind of courses that I'm doing, a lot of it is we all might have the information we need, but nobody has the information. Maybe I have a lot, maybe I have a bunch of experience, maybe I can phrase it certain ways or do certain things with my presence. But at best, that's a component of the process. Really, there's this distributed intelligence of everybody collaboratively trying to figure out the solution to these questions. So it's like, how do you create the right kind of participants and the right kind of encouraged group mind so that it can provide us with the answer to that? And that's why you have to put some time aside at a pre-event rather than just sit down and give everybody the manifesto. This is what we're going to be working on. All right, we can't do it. It's going to be very open-ended because we've got to figure this out together.
If it could all just be written down in a book, save us all time. We've all read the book, right?
Yeah, it's so interesting how the formulation of the problem is itself a problem. And like when I try to talk about this with like people outside, they're like, oh, what's the thing you're solving? I'm like, yeah, you get it. They're like, what? But like here with like the merge people, it feels like everybody gets it that we don't get it, and this is something that we're like, even defining the problem is already like, don't take up that space unless unless you like, yeah, like unless it's real or something.
Yeah, I just ran this symposium at Greg Enrique's Consilience Conference over the last couple of days. And so the symposium I ran was called Iatrogetic Soteriology. It's like, so what does trying to help and trying to save things cause as a form of harm was the idea. And like, how do we avoid that? Because we're all embedded in the malware. I think maybe it was Steve March said the malware runs deep. Right. So that we don't know which aspects of the broken code we're still embedded in, still enacting as we're trying to solve the problems. Right. What's our own blind spot? We don't know. So it's not just, this is why it's a meta crisis and not a poly crisis. There's several reasons for that. But one is it's not just an assortment of crises. It's a problem in the mind of the people who are solving the crisis. Right. We have our own blind spot relative. We can't just go about solving the many big crises the system faces. We also have to simultaneously solve the fact that we are somehow the source of the crisis.
Yeah. There's like this, like hearing you talk, like when I was hearing you talk, there's this pull to purity or something. where it's like anytime, and if I'm tainted, so everything I do is just going to cause more problems, and we need this like pure light that comes in and solves it all. But then also like realizing that itself is a formulation, and you're kind of falling into these other traps when you're doing that.
Yeah, so a lot of self-awareness, a lot of transparency, a lot of humility. All these things are needed. You're like, here we are. We are somewhat broken, somewhat dirty, somewhat the problem. Not completely, though. Somewhat clean, somewhat the solution. We don't know exactly what those mixes are, but they're all in play. And if we can at least acknowledge all of that and show up in a convivial spirit, we might be able to exchange something between each other that creates the kind of intelligence that we need. As well as, of course, there are practical solutions to a lot of the problems we face.
Yeah.
But then the question is, why is humanity not mobilizing on the practical solutions we have to all of these problems? There's an upstream issue that's in us.
I got this image of I think it was Macbeth, Shakespeare, the three witches, bubble, bubble, toil and trouble. Like we gotta, I see this around Emerge. We gotta create the melting pot of all of these practitioners, mixing their ideas, mixing their stuff, mixing their pathologies, mixing their mistakes all together, and some of that will yield outcomes, good outcomes. Some of it will not be so good, but some of it will yield really powerful results.
And a lot of it may be indirect, or it may be time delays, right? It's not like you're going to walk out of Emerge Toronto and solve the world's problems. But if you're just looking at some fungus on the ground, what good is that until it turns out it's interweaving the entire forest? But it takes a while for it to pull that off.
There's a thread I'm interested in that I've seen among, very delicately said, advanced practitioners or practitioners with experience, which is that somehow they can speak their own language, but they can hear other people's language and they can translate. Like each of the more, like the beginner practitioners don't understand what you mean. The advanced practitioners, doesn't matter if you're speaking your language or their language or someone else's language, they know what you mean. And I'm curious if you have a sense of what that is. If we bring together these practitioners that can understand each other, what's going on with the translation? Why can they translate?
Yeah, I think there's a combination of things there. One is they've probably put a lot of practice into listening carefully, that I think their own wisdom has come out of being able to decode other people's nonsense. In my own experience, some of the most amazing practitioners I've met, you meet these people and go, wow, this guy has capacities. This guy has a level of sheer beingness that goes beyond me. And I'm pretty sure every word out of his mouth is bullshit. So I've got to be able to listen through what he's saying to get what I want from him or her.
Right.
So that I think there's people have a lot of that experience. And if they've had some success in their inner life, part of it's because they've been able to listen past the surface of what other people are saying. But then another part of it is when they come together with each other, especially, they're listening with, let's say, other ears, right? You're listening with your soma, you're listening with your heart, you're listening to what we might metaphorically call energy or vibes or something like that. You've got a number of receivers that are open in addition to just picking up the language. And then when it comes to communicate, though, you have a tendency and perhaps a creative duty to say it in your own peculiar way, because you're receiving this something from the others and you're going to put something back out, but it's only coming back out when you're really in your own idiosyncratic groove. Same way the rest of the creatures in the ecosystem are. A frog's going to do a weird frog thing and a cricket's going to do a weird cricket thing. You got to do your peculiar thing. So you have to not worry so much about how can I parse this in a way that's generically understandable to everyone in a quick and simple way. There's something to that skill set, but the most important thing in this kind of a gathering is for you to have an authentic output, which probably means being idiosyncratic in your communication.
He just nailed it. I'm like, oh yeah, that's like really, really sharply done. freedom of expression and practice on the listening.
You mentioned origin stories before.
Oh,
Do we want to do
yeah.
that?
Yeah, I want to
Like,
know.
are you curious? I'm
I,
undecided whether I'm curious about myself or not, but if you guys are, I'm into it.
I there's something like maybe I can set you up for this one. There's something like when I know where someone's come from, the 2D image of their face suddenly has a bit more depth to it, and their origin and their identity. I'm like, oh, it's not just Layman's face. It's like Layman's entire cultural lineage is meeting my entire cultural lineage. Where like this metaphor of like dragons holding like finger puppets, and we are each the finger puppets, but our entire lineages are like the dragons behind us of like who we are and where we come from. And in order to create that meeting of history between two people, we need to know who the dragons are and present the dragons and represent our dragons. How does that sound for like, so tell us your backstory a little bit.
Well, I've got a combination of European and a little bit of Moorish blood, but mostly Celtic and Scandinavian. My people were the kind of people who just kept going west all the time until they couldn't go west anymore. And that's a peculiar thing for people to do. I have sort of 5 generations on the West Coast. My great grandmother moved out there. I grew up on a really rural island. I don't know if we talked about this before or not. It was the sort of site of 3 failed utopias, but also a really gentle, welcoming, naturalistic place. Here's a funny thing. I got a birth memory in my early 20s. So like, make of that what we may, right? I lived in Japan for a while, and there was a earthquake night. And during the earthquake night, I had what felt like a bunch of past life memories. Although they're only fragments of other lives, but they feel as real to you as yourself. And then you try to arrange a story out of them. But one of them was of being born. And it was sort of the other side of a story my mother had told me about my conception. So like I was coming down out of this vortex, and she was there calling out to me. Then I came in and got closer and closer, and then it was the event of my birth, and it was the whirling, and I didn't know which one of there was me and my mother, my father, and I didn't know which one was me. There's just this going around and around feeling until I landed in one of the units. So that's an interesting thing to me, because as soon as it came into my mind in my 20s that night, it established itself in my internal timeline at the beginning. So I can't say for sure that's a birth memory, but in my personal narrative memory, that's where it shows up. So that's kind of an origin story. It's peculiar. And it comes with the backstory of this other subtle adventure of multiple lives trying to make up some kind of story. So that it's like that one, the imaginal backstory splices in with the genetic backstory, and they start to run together in my life.
It's like it's non-linear, like origin story, as in like the origin happened in your 20s, but really, yeah, your origin story happened in your 20s, like your birth happened. Yeah, I don't even know how to express that.
There's a lot of talk of like spiritual awakening, which tends to happen in your 20s anyway, but this one projected itself earlier into you in your biological timeline.
Yeah, it seems to me there's a lot of stuff about time that appears to work retroactively. Now, whether that's just part of the phenomenology of doing it as a human being, or whether it's part of the nature of temporis itself, I'm not sure we'll ever really know that, but it's fun to play with time loops of various kinds.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got your birth. When did you pick up practices, spiritual practices? Well,
here's 2 things. One thing is, I had this grandmother, Ruth, and she died when I was pretty young, and everyone's like, oh, you and Ruth used to go on walks and hang out a lot. I don't really remember that, but she left me these books, and they were like left for me when she died. and she was like a witchy character, like mid 20th century theosophist, adventurer kind of lady. And these books were old time meditation books, old time, Rosicrucians and Freemasons and the Hermetic wisdom of the East and the alchemical notebooks and all these fascinating things, right? So when I was a kid, you're learning to read and you're aware these books are for you. So your reading is like migrating slowly toward them. So as soon as I could, I started to read that stuff because I felt like it was for me. I felt like she left it for me. And so that gave me a really good background in big picture transformational models that have been used in our culture for thousands of years. And on the other hand, we lived in the Bahamas for a while when I was a kid, and I went to this party, and what I was told was it was a guy, a former SAS guy, British Special Services guy. He was having this party. It was the first time I ever heard David Bowie. It was also, he had this book on yoga. It was like a picture book too, and I made it like these guys who pulled their tongue and like cut it and salt it and get really long tongues and ride blindfolded through the streets of Delhi and all that kind of old-fashioned yogi trick stuff. But I was captivated. I was just a little kid. I asked him if I could just have this book, and he said yes. And so I brought it home, and I started doing a mantra meditation on the plane on the flight home. It was, I guess, the second grade or something like that. So my meditation experience started around then.
Oh wow.
Wow. And then you slit your tongue and your mom got very mad. Started riding a unicycle backwards through town,
That's right. You should see what I can do with my anus.
All those practices.
That's what you need the alone time for, like the
That's right. That's right.
Some like sun bathing naked.
Makes me feel at home.
This is an interesting direction for merch.
I mean, there's other stuff that, like, I just had all kind of, weird, strange, altered states and subtle realm experiences and stuff like that all the time, peaks and stuff when I was a kid. So we had a good, really healthy, really open, and very education friendly environment. So it's not odd that I would have had a lot of peak experiences. That's a good nest for that. But many of them skewed towards sort of technical, esoteric inner practice stuff. That was what was on my mind all the time. I remember one thing where we had a substitute music teacher one day, and he was very inventive and, hold a note and run around the gymnasium as long as you can. I remember that. And at the end of the music class, he had us lie down. He's do a relaxation. He's like, put your head to sleep, put your chest to sleep, put your hands to sleep. So I'm laying there. I never encountered this before. And I thought, well, I'm not asleep, but you know what? I'm tingly. That's interesting.
Oh.
So I didn't think much about it. And then a couple of weeks later, I read this book that my mom had called Creative Visualization by Shakti Graham. It had a section on relaxing yourself and feeling full of energy. I'm like, that happened to me in that music class. So then I would try to do it each night before bed to relax and tingle. And it seemed to me it took way too long. It took like 10 minutes. And I was like, I got to get this down to like a minute. And I remember getting it down to 30 seconds one summer, and I ran out. My merits were in the garden. I'm like, I got it down to 30 seconds. I can make my whole body tingle in under 30 seconds. They had no idea what the hell I was talking about, but it was a big event for me.
Yeah, that's huge.
Somatic interoception. As soon as I started
easy.
working with that became a standard part of my entire experience of reality after that.
Yeah, it sounds like you're describing PT, which is like a real thing.
Yeah. It's one of those things too. You're like, how much of the history of human spirituality is downstream from people going, hey, that tingles.
Far too much.
Yeah, and that's the embodied knowledge, I think, that we're talking about. It's like your body's literally telling you, showing you things.
It's interesting. I've heard conversation about the jhanas where someone was like, went to a teacher and said, I can do the jhanas. It just takes an hour to get through them all. And the teacher's like, well, do it faster. just like you gotta work on it. Like work on that, like moving through the states. Like that's just a skill.
Yeah.
Sounds like you just did that.
There's something fun about the audacity of it. So I was at a couple of months ago, I was at this Respond event at the Maple Monastery in Vermont, and it's run by a Zen adept named Sorio. And so he was one of these 9 teachers. I was there, John Vervaeke and Benita Roy and some other people were there with us. And Sorio's sort of casual appetite was fantastic. It'd be like, what do we want to get out of this conference? And he would say something like, well, I'd really like us to have a practical tool for ending the suffering of all beings. And if possible, I'd like that by lunch.
Sounds
like, yeah, that's the kind of audacity we should have with this, because it's playful, but also there's an urgency there too. Let's do more of this. Let's do it faster. Let's do it better.
I realize I've actually done one of these myself. There was a practice that is sort of a self-inquiry practice with multiple steps, 10 or 15 different questions. And I was playing with it in a therapeutic modality, which is you working with another person and guiding them through it. And then I was like, wait a second, why do I take so long to ask these questions? What if I just like try and like get the emotional posture of the question, like ask that one, and then like fire off the emotional posture of the next question. And I got this practice to like, it's like a lightning bolt, bang, 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 to like, curiosity about the thing, then like appreciation for the response, and then like just like dancing with this practice. And the ability to be able to do that really quick means that one day I woke up a bit early in the morning and I was lying around, went back to sleep, and then I was having a dream. And I was kind of doing this practice back and forth with the dream characters, and I was like half awake, so waking up and going like, oh yeah, that the dream character, and then like falling back asleep and kind of doing this therapy practice on myself in my sleep, because I could just do it like that, because I had it down pat, because I practiced like you described down to the 30-second mark, and it was just so easy to clear whatever. I don't even remember what I was dreaming about, but whatever it was, I was working on the characters in my dream by offering the compassion and then switching back to the question. And yeah, this is like advanced practices.
Yeah, it's not like doing it faster is always the solution, but
No.
Getting involved in trying it different ways is one of the ways, like you're saying, that it passes into your subconscious capacities.
Oh yeah.
And then it can go on all the time when you're awake, and also can go on in other states of consciousness, and that yields really interesting results sometimes.
Well, this leads me to a very interesting question I have. Occasionally, I meet a practitioner who's absolutely remarkable, and they don't appear to be doing anything in the moment. Like they're just kind of standing there being themselves. Is it that they have practices that have passed into their subconscious and practicing all the time? Like what is going on for this remarkable practitioner that seems to be continuously healing people or something, even without appearing to actively do anything? Do you have a working model for remarkable practitioners?
I would say there's no such thing as no practice.
Right.
Right. Like we exist in a dynamic reality. There's really no static conditions of any kind. Anything that looks like it's remaining the same is actually doing something that's producing that condition over time. So like the atoms are atoming,
right.
Your body is bodying, things like that. Right. So any effects we're seeing are dynamic effects. Something is being done, some activity is taking place. Now that activity is, if it's working really well, it's largely passing into your subconscious mechanism like anything else. That's most of how our embodied learning works. You have to pay a lot of front brain consciousness to it when you're trying to learn it. And as you start to get better and weave it into other tasks, make it part of your flow experience, it starts to operate at a semi-conscious or subconscious level. But now the model, we talked last time about my model of how this stuff works, right? So it has an element where what you're trying to do is produce a generalized coherence, a surplus coherence out of certain combinations, arrangements, or hyper-coordinations of your subjectively active internal information systems. And so if you succeed at that, you get more and more experience of like a generalized condition of being. But if you're succeeding at that really well, then it starts to hang out a lot of the time, starts to be there whenever you check. So then your practice might shift a little bit. So your practice, instead of trying to produce that state, now your practice is being with it, relating to it, right? Maybe you're being with it as you're
Checking
just
on it.
feeling it. Maybe you're being with it like imagine a conversation, you treat it like it's an entity, like, oh, maybe this is the guru or Christ or something. I'm going to talk to it, but there's a devotional being with quality once you've gotten pretty good at stabilizing that sense.
Would you say that's the metamodern person, or like that's the emerge? That's like that being is the one that we're trying to be with?
I think that the metamodern sensibility affords a much greater potential for going into these states than other kinds of cultural codes do, because the ability to shift back and forth between valid perspectives means A, you're not getting trapped in one as much, but B, your odds of being able to sort of synchronize or integrate different things is much greater if you can fluidly move back and forth between those things, right? So it's one of the things we'll be looking at in the masculine and feminine course. You got to play those yin yang opposites in yourself. John Vervaeke calls it opponent processing. It's also playing back and forth between the different systems you have inside yourself that make sense of the world. Right? You have different perspectives, you have different feelings, you have arguments between different parts of yourself. And if you can do that, if you can say, yes, this, oh, but also this, and this is true, but doesn't cancel that somehow, even though they appear to be opposites. You have like a capacity that if you use it right, can take you into that integrated space, I think, much more competently. So I'm very excited about bringing together people who don't necessarily have a lot of spiritual, let's say, experience, but they have this fundamental opportunity to be really good at it. And I think they tell us something about how those kinds of wisdom practices can be regenerated in this kind of a cultural, technological, and historical moment.
It's interesting. I'm looking at where I'm at on a journey to try and move closer to some of the early like spiral purple color way of being. Like I'm trying to move more in touch with that. And it sounds like you're suggesting metamodern, and one of the benefits I see with that is it's like deeply in touch with the magical and the mythical and the something hard to describe. And you're kind of pointing to the metamodern enables that a bit better than just the purple level, that the metamodern can weave a bit easier in between these states. So kind of excited about that.
If it does it right. But if it does it right, it has a lot in common with archaic and indigenous modes, right? And right, all kinds of things can go wrong in the transmission of wisdom from our ancestors, right? That's thousands of years. That's a lot of time for shit to go wrong, for trauma and disruption and foolishness to invade those processes. But where it succeeded, we still find the remnants today. We certainly see it in the ancient records of people who were really healthy, really sophisticated, really well-developed human beings. And it might be that the kind of even neurological flexibility exhibited by kind of proto-civilized people is similar to the one we're seeing now in sort of the meta-civilized culture and mind space. A lot of people tell this story about how there's been like a fixated kind of left brain dominance in that Ian McGilchrist sense, that we might have exaggerated a certain form of psychological functioning over the course of becoming urban citizens, learning to read, learning print literature, right? Having to do things in an unnatural way and adapt to that technically. So that might have been a distortion arc over the period of the last several thousand years. And the metamodern might be a healthy recovery of the archaic, but with a new set of capacities and forms of knowledge that have been produced by the journey.
I'm excited
Anyway,
about
my
that.
personal feeling is there's a lot of resonance between the proto-civilized and the trans-civilized, let's say.
I'm excited to see it all kind of like weave together and emerge. I'm excited to see a variety of practitioners trying it out on each other.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of what seems to me to be instinctive shamans of a new style that don't necessarily have a peer group. They don't necessarily have elders. They don't necessarily know what they're doing, but they're clearly exhibiting a set of interests and skills that I think fall into that category. And I want more and more of them to get together and to weave that together with this new emerging set of intersubjective skills that are coming out, right? There's never been a moment of recorded history where more people were interested in how do we make a field? How do we make a we space? Right? What's an interpersonal technology? These are really new discussions, right? Our ancestors might have had some great heuristics for this that slowly evolved over the generations. But we're at a time where if we can bring together people who have this new sensibility in safe, secure ways, where they're well informed and sort of righteously oriented to the problems the world are facing and trying to deploy these open-ended intersubjective new relational technologies, there's the possibility of some high collective intelligence shared spirit network of people that will A, feel awesome, and B, possibly be part of the solution.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts. Like I'm still like I feel like I'm still slow and like in absorbing the wisdom you're embodying. It feels a lot like there's all this stuff like I would do like by myself and like hide from everyone. And now it's a bunch of people who have been doing that for longer than I have. and and then also like coming together and talking about it and then doing that together, like doing it with each other in a way that is obvious to everybody else what they're doing, like sharing that part while doing that, and then like taking that up a level where the environment is that
it's necessary in order to take it up a level and in order to have it sort of flourish and emerge more richly, but the caution is well justified, right? So it's not like this is something you're supposed to demonstrate in front of everybody all the time. It's also something that's gone terribly wrong throughout history at various times, right? You may need to hide this from people. And if you're going to start doing it with other people, if we're going to build up some networks, like the way I'm imagining a kind of mycelial quasi shaman network inside the heart of the Emerge event, that requires a great deal of trust, right? Who are you going to grow together with on this? You don't just leap into that. You got to vet each other and slowly come together. And so the caution serves us in numerous ways. It serves us in protecting these things that we want to work on from the regular culture, but it also serves us in slowing us down and making us really mindful about how we try to figure out trust networks between each other, because that's not something we want to jump into. It's something we want to grow carefully.
Yeah, I am very much like feeling this. It's this it's like the initial urge of like, oh my god, everybody here is like this, like let's do this, like all the way, let's just start at 11, right? Like, and work backwards. But the trust thing is really intense for me, because like I have all these systems of trust that I use with different people where I know, okay, you guys don't really have that flexibility, so this is the system of trust you use, so I can use that with you, I can use this other system with you and this other system with you. And like I trust myself to move between these systems, but then I'm interacting with other people who don't have this almost fixated trust system. And sometimes I talk to people and it's just like I'm blown away by the level that they're at, or the way they're able to play this game. And yeah, like navigating that trust is it's overwhelming at times.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm hoping we're all going to get better at is helping each other to take all these different signals we experience seriously, right? Like where there's caution, take that seriously. Where there's, oh, this is overwhelming. Yeah, well, maybe you're getting overwhelmed. Take that seriously, right?
Yeah.
You go be by
Well, that's what
yourself for a while.
Yeah, no, I'm constantly doing that with the merge where it's like, oh, we need to. I'm like, no, Daniel, just chill. Like, you don't have to do. It's 6 months away. You don't have to do it all today. And then I think also part of these I guess discussions that we're having is like, okay, I need to touch the people to see, like, get that embodied feeling and the touch points, and to like push buttons and see what happens. And part of like the recording it is so that other people can like see my mistakes and not necessarily they don't have to put themselves out there. They can see it play through. And then maybe other weavers also coming in and doing using their systems, and like just like I guess doing this in public, kind of in a recorded way, so that everybody gets to see each other's stuff. It's like, it's one of the ways I'm trying to build up trust, is to have all these recordings go through time so people can see this is about what you're expecting.
We got a question in our chat that I want to weave together in trust. The question is, what do you transcend from purple and what do you include? And I feel like it fits very well on the trust topic. Like, which bits of that are worth trusting and which bits are like, I don't know, we'll leave them where they are. I don't know if you have a thought on that, Layman. Of course, we're talking about spiral dynamics, and purple being the tribal mythic color of the code, where society built on
It's
that.
interesting because it depends
society.
on the situation you're in, right? Like how much you transcend or include from purple, say, makes a big difference whether you're in your living room or you're camping. Right. So if you go into different situations, you might need to re-evoke different degrees of those functions. Makes a big difference whether you're watching TV or carving a totem pole, something like that. So it's going to play out differently in different contexts. The main thing, because you don't know how much you're going to need at any given time of these sort of archaeological strata in your consciousness. So you want to have as much of it potentially available to you as possible for whenever you might need that. But what you want to leave behind is any kind of fixated over identification with it, right? So let's say purple has this great ability that it's built up over generations of really being in touch with some piece of land, even through magical and imaginal metaphors and lore and these adapted rituals and customs, allows them to really be of a place. That's fantastic. So what we want is to be able to get in touch with a place, but not to be stuck in that particular place. And I think that's sort of symptomatic of the whole thing, right? You want to be able to work with a totem. You want to be able to work with the fire in the woods, but not only work with that fire in those woods for the rest of your life and then pass that on to your children and grandchildren, so to speak, or only be able to relate to that particular totem. So I think what we include, what we take with us, is the flexible functions of purple, and what we leave behind are the exclusive identifications with specific instances of that function. But that said, any number of purple skills might come in handy again under the right circumstances.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would add is to like recognize the magic of a place is of the place, and not extrapolate that to extrapolate that properly to the rest of the world.
I'm interested in trust building practices, in the hope that some of these, what you say, makes it to the field of play on the ground at Emerge, how do you get practitioners to start trusting each other? Assuming that they are advanced practitioners who intend to like show up and really get lots out of Emerge, but they may show up being all like, but I don't know anyone here. Like, how do we move forwards into greater trust of each other?
Yeah, you're going to get some people who show up and feel unfamiliar, feel excluded, feel anxious. You're going to get some people who show up and are too invested in their confidence, too invested in their routine, can't quite admit to the fact that they feel out of place or don't know what to do or don't know anyone there. Those are both problems we have to deal with. And I think having an open discourse around naming fears and anxieties and things like that, I think that's really important for people to show each other, to kind of template it and go, this makes me anxious, or this feels awkward, or I don't know, like everybody's going to come in various degrees of playing a role of being one of these special people. And we want to undermine that to some degree. And I think just admitting you're having as much humility as possible and showing each other the fun of exposing human vulnerability. I think that's really important. That it's not just this ordeal of exposing yourself to each other, that it's an entertaining thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's part of the richness of being a complicated human being. So that's a part of it, that kind of an attitude, that kind of mutual demonstration. A lot of it is just being around people, right? It's one of those things like first day of school. There's only so much you can do on the first day of school, right? On the fifth day of school or 2 months in, there's so much more comfort and ease and trust. There's a iteration of these encounters, right? It's one of the reasons the pre-event especially is going to go over several days. And I hope in different spots and in different modes, because you can't do it all at once, right? You have to interact and then go away and then come back and try it a different way, or interact with someone else and come back. So I think this, the opportunity, the space in which we can have multiple small interactions and feel each other out without getting stuck in any one particular situation, to be able to come and go and come and go. I think that's really important. Now, it's also going to be a situation where a lot of people are going to come in with their own experimental or well-practiced strategies for doing this, right? 80% of these people are going to be like, yeah, I tried this, or at my facilitations, we do it like this. So that's going to be a really interesting thing to see, is who wants to try to use their methods. How do people feel about trying each other's methods? I think there'll be a circulation of different kinds of practices between these people, because they're all going to be, to some degree, at least in the pre-event, people who have a lot of personal practices. What I hope is we don't get trapped in any small number of people being too eager to demonstrate their practices, and we establish much more of like an inter-practice space where people share and invite, but nobody becomes too much of the instructor or the center or the outputter of an established methodology. Because even though we have a lot of great practices, to me, we're trying to hold space for something novel, right? We don't want to just get trapped in our intersubjective trust building practices. We want to be a little bit outside of that somehow, a little bit more raw with each other.
Had this recently, been doing sort of breathing meditation for a very long time, and I decided I would try and find a new breath pattern. And I sat for hours battling existing breathing patterns, like trying to give up on them and kill them and die them off, and like trying to find a new, clean, fresh. It's a very hard thing to hold space for the novel. The novel possibility of like, what if there's a new way to breathe here? Like, still, it didn't get very far. I'm still stuck in that breathing practice. Like, oh, okay, holding space
for the novel. You sit down with a piece of paper and a pen and you go, what I want to draw is a line, is a kind of line I've never drawn before. Oh, you hold that pen there for a long time doing nothing, just canceling. No, I've kind of done one of those before. No. It's beautiful. It takes you right to your edge. It's a beautiful mindfulness to an exercise like that.
Well, I hope that it's possible to get a whole room of emergenites to that edge. That's the dream, right?
Yeah, I hope so too. And I think if we come in with that spirit and that intention and this discussion and the willingness to demonstrate that for each other and to show the people who are more reluctant for one reason or another that it's possible and it's fun and that everybody's doing it, then we've got a real chance.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, this vision you're putting forward, I'm like, I love it, and also I feel like I can't exactly wrap my brain around it. But yeah. Oh shit. Sorry, let me process this a little more.
This is the like, it's not meant to be a brain wrap around thing. It's meant to be a like, my brain can't wrap around that because you.
Because as soon as it wraps around it, it's a thing,
you're accurately detecting it. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel seen in a way that I don't normally feel seen. And like, yeah, I feel like often I like try to do this, but like also like I don't expect anyone to see it. So I like, I don't even know what my standards are. Like, I don't know if I'm any good at this or not. Just because like it's I've never had that like really pure interaction in this way. It's more of just like I'm just trying to do it and like it gets done or not, and I can't, like, I don't have the self-awareness, like I can't see myself. My mind keeps going to like, oh well, like this is the next beat, but like also that's not the next beat here. Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah, that's what's really exciting to me about this event, right? Like there's a real value to the, let's say, the exoteric form of the Emerge event. But there's this other possibility for the esoteric Emerge event. And that's going to be something that flows between those. Like it's the next beat and it's not the next beat. Like what river negotiates between those two? And is there a community of people who can talk in that place and build something? Is there a network that can be established between the worlds, so to speak?
I'm keen. I don't know what's possible, but I want to be right there on the edge. Daniel's still processing.
Yeah. Like I've got a lot of answers, but obviously that's not it's not the question. God. Yeah, I mean, like there's a certain amount, I think, of just like having to sit in the not having to, of getting to sit in the uncomfortability and the not having that backup move, not having that thing that you can, the canned psychotech, the next thing that you could just bring up, the model that we're in. It's like you have to you get to live life. And you just live it. And then that's what you did. It's how I imagine, like you've talked about your ancestors and my ancestors. I'm Jewish, so I got that whole ancestors, and I think about them a lot when I'm doing this, and like how they're like, they didn't have the Bible to those people to like look at. They were just living the life at the edge, and death is always there, and life is always there, and God is always there, but also like not like those things come and go as well. And that it feels that that's what we're doing as well.
Yeah, I think it's archaic, or is what I wrote in the blurb too, right? It's going to be archaic and futuristic at the same time. It's something that's deeply built into us and deeply built into our ancestors. And if we, the part of us that's looking back on game A and modernity and all the old systems it's a little bit like the part before we had any of these systems built up. What was it like for us then? What was it like to be the people who created traditions rather than the people who had traditions given to them? Their experience of these things had to be very straightforward, very existential, but I think also very lively. And that's why I want this. You said, like living life. Exactly. I want this. I want the whole scene, but I want this event in particular. I want it to be lively. I want it to be vibrant. I want it to feel like life is doing something.
Yeah, I mean, I've got like a bunch of objections. Yeah, but don't you know bad things happen in life? But they're all like game A objections, essentially.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe it'll crash and burn, right? We don't know. But bad things happen in technical systems as well.
Yeah, but you can explain those away after.
Yeah.
Like there's no plausible deniability here. You know what I mean? It's like this is like real responsibility, I think.
Yeah. I think we do have to. I mean, we could always just blame God or something like that, but I think we do have to develop an attitude amongst each other that there's a number of responsibilities that we have to try to take on here. We're really the ones doing this.
I have a separate thread of question for Layman. I was talking to someone yesterday, and they were like talking about some of these new AI things that are coming out. We're at today in the world, we're at ChatGPT 4. That's where we're up to, and it's starting to seem very powerful and have a lot of potential. And this friend of mine said, kind of wishing for a map that our older religions obviously didn't have a word for AI, didn't have a way that they could sort of see this coming. And yet it feels kind of disappointing that we don't have a thread out of our ancient traditions that are like, you know, the AI thing will come and the new world will be here in some shape or form. Like, how do we map what the heck is going on now with these AI systems back to our beautiful long-term traditions?
I mean, I think the place we would look is to the imaginal depiction of non-human intelligences in general, right? So they may not have thought, hey, we can build a tool that can act like a collective intelligence and feed our systems back to us like it's an entity. They didn't really have that kind of a discourse, but they did have elves, aliens, demons, gods, semi-autonomous, non-human intelligences that we had to figure out how to be in conversation with. Right. So there might be some skill sets involved in that we need to pick up again in order to face this in a way that makes sense to us.
I have a hunch that
but I also think it goes to this event too, which is actually I was talking to Cheryl about this morning, which is I've for a long time had a sense that the interobjective, in Wilbur's grid, there's like plural outside systems and plural inside systems. So the plural outside systems in a way have lagged behind, right? We've had really rich communions in this world. We've had really rich dharma. We've had really deep sages. Do we have voting systems that are at that level? Do we have organizational dynamics at that level, right? So the external systemic thing in many ways has been lagging behind. And often we get together and we have these deep intersubjective, even like transpersonal consciousness seems to erupt. But you're like, how do you instantiate that in a program of some kind? We don't really know how to do that very well. So that's all still true. But what we're seeing right now, like literally as we speak, is a huge boost in interobjective systems. The collective intelligence that's emerging from external tools is accelerating like crazy, right? Like the generative AI thing is a news story every single day. I was expecting it to proliferate fast and change everything. It's going faster than I anticipated. And it's bizarre to me that there's so many people not even tracking it because it's literally in the process of changing everything as we speak. So there's this right now this year, this huge boost in external collective intelligence systems. And to balance that out, we've got to have a boost in internal intersubjective collective intelligence systems. And I think that's part of what we're doing here is we've got to take the mutual game to a new level so it can balance out that external collective game.
Yep, checks out with me. I'm like, I earlier this week was describing if reality as we see it is flatland, we're in flatland. AI has just three-dimensionalized our flatland. Like that's the sort of impact that I expect from AI, and it's happening faster than, like you said, faster than you even anticipated. Like you can, I've been searching something, asking ChatGPT something at least once a day since I started using it basically, and I know tens of people who are doing that as well. They're just, it's automatic to just, I'm not going to Google it anymore. I'm going to check with ChatGPT for suggestions. Like that's, it's not just one person having access.
Conversation becomes the basic interface with information, and that's really powerful.
Right.
And I think it's going to create an even deeper split in the populations that we're seeing, right? Like some people are going to thrive with these new tools, and other people are going to use them in a way that means they don't have to do even the minimal amount of thinking they've ordinarily been doing, right? If it can write your essays and your emails and your applications for you, then what do you need your prefrontal cortex for? So imagine a lot of people for 5 years from now using 30% less of their thinking faculties and being 50% more confused by the ambiguity of the world around them. That's a recipe for a lot of wild mass hysteria situations, at the same time as some people with more speed and creativity and dialogical access to the full information resources of the human species better than ever before. So we could be looking at a really extreme emergent polarization with this stuff.
I'm with you all the way. I'm like, that's exactly what I'm seeing as well. Terrifying.
I'm looking forward to when we can invite the AI to these conferences and have them as part of that conversation.
Well, we ought to be able to without too much difficulty. Like these things at the moment are complex prediction engines trained up on sets of information. That set of information might be everything written on the internet, or it might be some specific small subset, right? You train up one that benefits your particular political or ideological thing. People are going to have their own. But why not just have an event where there's speakers everywhere and it's trained up on all of us speaking at the event, right? So then it feeds our collective back to ourself, that what we're creating becomes the feed for one of these intelligences. And then it can go to the next event and it's like trained up as the perfect embodied recording of the previous event. Maybe it goes from event to event or something like that. There's a lot of opportunities for interesting new experiments in wisdom bots.
Psychotechnologies Live.